Today we will be solving quadratics by using square roots and by factoring. For our first problem, we went ahead and changed it to a negative 44. That was a typo there. So we're going to go ahead and solve it with the negative 44. Our first step is to get the x squared by itself. So first we're going to move that 1 to the other side by doing the inverse operation. It's a positive 1, so in order to move it, we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. We get negative 5x squared equals negative 45. The next step is to divide both sides by negative 5. What is negative 45 divided by negative 5? Okay, so now I have x squared is equal to 9. How do I get the x by itself? Okay, and this is what I was talking about, how it's going to have two solutions. We're not going to use the plus or minus symbol right now. We're going to go ahead and say that x equals to a positive 3 and x equals a negative 3. Okay. For the next question, we're going to start by adding 31 to both sides. And the reason we're choosing to use the square root method, not just because it literally says use the square root method, but if I don't have an x value, then I should use the square root method, okay? I can factor and call my b value 0. I could have done that, but these are easier to factor because they don't have the x value, no b value, okay? The next step to get the x squared by itself is to divide by 4. What is 80 divided by 4? Okay. How do I get the x by itself? Can I take the square root of 20? Can I break up the 20 into numbers that I can take the square root of? Okay. 4 and 5. So I do want us to still think about the two solutions when I take the square root of this. The reason we broke it down into 4 and 5 is because we can take the square root of 4. So I'm going to take the square root and put it in front. But I want us to know that we have a positive 2 square root of 5. And we have a negative 2 square root of 5. If you can't break it down anymore, like if you have the square root of 10, you would leave it as a positive square root of 10, a negative square root of 10. You can't always break down every radical. Okay. Question number 3. In order to get the x squared by itself, I'm first going to add 15 to both sides. I get 4x squared equals 16. The next step is to divide by 4. So now I have x squared equals to 4. How do I get the x by itself? Okay, what is the square root of 4?
2.
Ooh, but what kind of 2? A negative and a positive. Okay, we're going to go on to question number 4. So we have a few more square roots. These are going to get a little bit harder now, okay? You're going to see how these look a little bit different. On number 4, what's the first step we should do? Okay, minus 7. (12 minus 7 is?
6. 3. 5.
It is 5, okay? Now again, my goal is to get the x squared by itself. How do I move this 3 to the other side? Divide by 3. So x squared. So now we have x squared equals a fraction. Not 2.5. So how do I get rid of the square on the x? Right, I can't leave a fraction underneath my radical. It's not considered simplified. So the way, Josh, to get rid of the divide by 3 is I'm going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by 3. So now I have the square root of 15 over 9. I always take the square root of 9, but here's my dilemma though. It's on the bottom. So when I take it out, it has to still stay as a fraction on the bottom. So 1 over, okay.
Over 9.
Well, what's the square root of 9?
I mean, we're at a degree.
Uh-huh. And yes, we still have a positive, and I can't break down the 15, so the 15 stays there. Mm-hmm. So the two answers, I do have a positive 1/3 square root of 15 and a negative 1/3 square root of 15. Okay. The next one. Okay.
Would be a fraction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I get 2x squared is equal to 1. Again, my goal is to get the x squared by itself. How do I move the 2 to the other side? Okay. Next is take the square root. Right, I can't leave a fraction under the radical, so I'm going to multiply by my denominator to make a perfect square there. If I can take the square root, I take the square root of it and put it on the outside. If it's the denominator, though, it needs to stay as a denominator. So when I take out the 4, what does it become on the outside? 1 over 2. What's left inside of my radical? The 2. So I have a positive and I have the negative. And yes, we'll go back to writing plus or minus tomorrow, but today I really want us to focus on the fact that it does have 2 solutions. Okay, question number 6. Okay, this one's going to be a little tiny bit different now because the x is not squared by itself. It's x minus 1 squared. I still want to get those parentheses by itself. What do I do to both sides of this equation? Okay. Take the square root. Since I cannot take the square root of a 17, I'm going to leave it as a positive square root of 17. And I'm going to leave it as a negative square root of 17. One more step. Okay, plus 1. Now when I move the 1 to the other side, I'm going to put it in front of the plus sign and in front of the minus sign. So x equals 1 plus the square root of 17. 1 minus the square root of 17. The only time we should combine it to a plus or minus is if they overlap like they do now. So I could rewrite this with a plus or minus. Tomorrow we will. Today I want us to focus on the fact that it is 2 different answers. Okay? So that's our review for taking the square root of both sides.
That's the answer.
Remember that we take the square root when we don't have an x value by itself. Okay, and even though that x value looks like it's by itself, it was technically still squared. Now the difference is when you have an x squared, an x, and a number, we can't factor by taking the square root. Ivan, you with me? Okay, so this is going to be factoring by grouping. Okay, so remember, if you guys need help, you can Google, you can YouTube. It's called factoring by grouping. So first we're going to move everything to one side. How do I move that negative 4x squared to the other side? Okay. And I do want to put it in order of standard form. So which is why I'm putting it in front.
Guess I'll put the 8.
8 in the middle. Once everything is on one side, now I have x squared, x, and a number, I'm going to go ahead. I do label my A, B, and C, just that when we write our factors, we remember what A, B, and C are. That is correct. Factors of A times C, but they have to add together to give me B. Okay, so 4 times 3, because that's AC, tells me I have to multiply to 12, but they have to add together to -8. So I want all my factors of 12. What are all the factors of 12?
1 and 12.
Okay,
2 and 6. 3.
Oh, they're both negatives, right?
so they have to multiply to a positive number, but they have to add together to negative. What's the other way that we can get a positive besides 2 positives? 2 negatives. So which one of those can both be negative to add to -8?
2 and 6.
Okay. -2 minus 6 does give you -8. Those are going to go in place of B. So what we're doing is we're breaking down B. So since B is an X, this is a minus 2X. This is a minus 6X. And we bring down your C value. Now, I did leave a big space in between them, and in a perfect world, I would always remember to do that because I'm going to group them. This is where the grouping comes in. I'm going to put the first 2 in parentheses. I'm going to put the second 2 in parentheses, and I'm going to put a plus sign in between them. So my goal here is to take out the greatest common factor of each parentheses. So that first parentheses, my greatest common factor is 2 what?
X.
2x. So you put the 2x on the outside. When I divide all of that by 2x, I get 2x minus 1. Because -2 divided by 2 still gives me that -1. On the second parentheses, remember I want that x value to turn into a positive. So I'm going to pull out a -3. If my parentheses are the same, then I know that this question was factorable, and I know that I've done everything correctly so far. If my parentheses are the same, then I group my coefficients into one parentheses. And the common binomial that they had the same, that's in my other parentheses. Once I have my factors, I set the factors, each of them, equal to 0. On the left side, I'm going to add 3 first.
Guess how many steps is this? It's like second. Huh?
What can you use the square root method?
To finish this question, we're going to go ahead and add 1 to both sides. Divide by 2, and you get x equals 1/2. So we do have 2 solutions. We have a positive 3/2 and a positive 1/2. So I know there were some questions about the factoring, so we're going to go ahead and do another one, okay? If you get stuck on a step, all you have to do is let me know. In order to factor, everything has to be on one side, okay? So Vincent, you with me? So the first step is I have to move that 4x to the other side. I'm going to...
-4 and then you put equals 0.
Whatever it is, you got to move it over. And make sure when you move it over that you still put it in order of 3x squared minus 4x minus 4.
Oh yeah, because your 4x is your -4x.
Okay. So once we move everything over, we do have an A, a B, and a C. We're looking at what goes into B. So we make our factors of AC,
-12 and then B is -4.
but they have to add to B. So I did hear that AC is -12. That is correct. But they have to add together to give me -4.
Yeah.
What are all of my factors of 12?
1 and 12.
Okay, so those are all my factors of a positive 12, but they have to multiply to give me negative 12, and they have to add together to give me negative 4.
Negative 6 and positive 2.
Yeah.
Negative 6 and positive 2, that is correct. Those are going to go in place of B. So we're splitting up B, and don't forget to put the X on both of those. So your A stays the same. Your B is plus 2X minus 6X, and you bring down your C value. And this is where that grouping comes to play. You put the first 2 in parentheses, the second 2 in
The first one
parentheses.
you're just dividing by X, right?
That is correct. For the first one, I don't have a number that goes into 3 and 2, but I do have an X that goes into both of them. Okay.
3X plus 2.
I have 3X plus 2. The second one, I need that negative 6 first of all to turn positive, okay? And the biggest number that goes into 4 and 6 is going to be a 2, so I divide by negative 2. And I'm left with 3X plus 2.
It's okay.
If my parentheses are the same, then I'm going to group my coefficients. And then my common binomial goes into the second parentheses. I now have my 2 factors that are equal to 0, so I set each factor equal to 0. For the first one, in order to move the 2 over, I add 2 to both sides. That's x equals to 2. For the second one, I move the 2 over by subtracting 2 from both sides. Okay. And then divided by 3, I get negative 2/3. So if I were to graph this graph would have x-intercepts of 2 and negative 2/3. We're going to do one question with factoring, okay? So this one is 4x squared minus 15x equals 4. Now again, we have to use factoring because there is an x squared, an x, and a number. So the method we're going to use today is the factoring. First, I'm going to move everything to one side. So I'm going to subtract 4. And I'm going to go ahead and put it after the negative 15x so I can line up into standard form. Standard form, I have an A, a B, and a C. I'm going to do factors of A times C, whose sum is B. So they have to multiply, you are correct, to negative 16. But they have to add to negative 15. So all of my factors of 16, 1 and 16.
Miss, you really know the answer.
That's all right there.
Okay. These are all numbers that multiply to 16. Now it's a negative 16. So one of the numbers has to be negative. They have to add to negative 15. So I know a lot of you guys are saying 1 and 16, but I've also heard the wrong negative. Is it negative 1 or is it negative 16? It's negative 16. 1 minus 16 is negative 15. These are going to go in place of B.
You know why? Because you're negative 30, yeah.
Okay. We're going to group the first 2 in parentheses, the second 2 in parentheses, and don't forget we are adding these binomials together. In the first parentheses, greatest common factor of 4 and 1 is just a 1. But I have x squared and x. I can divide by x. The second one, it is a 4, but because I want that negative 16, yep, I'm turning it to negative 4. If my parentheses are the same, then I'm pretty sure I did things correctly. Okay? We're going to group our coefficients together.
Missing the same. It's negative or I'll do that.
The parentheses.
Other day on the homework.
4x plus 1.
I was trying to get 60. I thought adding them to the
Okay.
sides, I tried to say.
So once I set my factors equal to 0, both of them. So on the first side, I add 4 to both sides. I get x equals 4. The second side, I subtract 1. And I divide by 4. I get x equals negative 1 over 4. Okay. So this is our review lesson for taking the square root and factoring. If you like this video, make sure you guys give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Have a good day.
We subscribe.